Star Wars Story is the 4th Disney Lucasfilm Star Wars movie that they've come out with in the last few years. This one is directed by Ron Howard. It wasn't always directed by Ron Howard. It was directed by Lord and Miller. There was some production issues. I'm sure you guys have all heard about this in the news. I don't really want to get into that shit because it's old news and there's a movie to talk about. Well, Solo Story stars Alden. It's Alden. I think his name is Alden. I can't remember his last name, but he is starring as a young Han Solo. You got Emilia Clarke. You got Woody Harrelson. You got Thandie Newton in this movie. You got Paul Bettany showing up for a brief spell in this movie. What is Solo: A Star Wars Story? Well, Solo: A Star Wars Story is a movie about Han Solo, obviously. This is the story of how Han Solo became the most beloved and charming scoundrel in the entire galaxy. That's it. That's pretty much the movie. There's some heist stuff going on, but you don't really give a shit about that. You want to know, how did the kid do? Well, my friends, that's what we're here to talk about. Gonna be 100% honest with you guys. This is probably the first Star Wars film of my entire life that I have walked into and not really been that excited for. Trailers and the marketing didn't really grab me. I kept wondering while this movie was coming out, like, okay, do we really need a movie like this? The kid that was playing Han Solo, Alden, what's his name? I just didn't believe. I didn't believe in him. I was like, okay, this guy's not that good an actor. I think it's gonna be shit. Having said that, I went into the movie and tried to give it a chance, and I will say the movie's actually not that bad. Doesn't necessarily mean that the movie is good, but the movie's not that bad. There is entertainment to be had here if you're looking in the right places. Well, for one thing, when it comes to Aldridge, or whatever his name is, as Han Solo, he was fine. He was functional. Keep in mind that that sounds like a backhanded compliment, but when my expectations for him were somewhere between a blade of grass and the depths of hell, him being functional is actually a good thing. You can tell sometimes there's that Han Solo swagger that's just begging to come out of him, but the rest of the time he's pretty much just doing a young Harrison Ford imitation. That's really all he can do with the character of Han Solo because of the way he was written in this film. So you gotta give him credit for at least getting that part right. Now, pretty much anybody could have done it. He didn't fuck it up, I guess, is the best way to put this. Best thing about the movie, hands down, is his dynamic with Chewbacca. His back and forth with Han Solo during the movie was actually one of the highlights. You get to find out how they met. You get to find out how they became such best friends. If this movie didn't get anything else right, it needed to get the relationship between Han and Chewie right, and it at least got that right. I'm sure you guys have heard a lot about Donald Glover. He's been a busy guy for the last few weeks, really for the last few years. I mean, the guy can pretty much do anything. Anything he touches turns to gold. He is exactly what I would picture a young Lando Calrissian to be. I mean, he is so charming. He's got such a slyness about him. Everything that Lando should have been in this movie, Donald Glover perfectly captured that. If they actually do a Lando spinoff, I actually would be on board with it as long as Donald Glover is playing a young Lando. I'll also say this movie looks pretty good. It has really good cinematography. I think the same guy who did the cinematography for this film also did the cinematography for Arrival, which is like one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen in my life. So the movie is well shot, and the movie also does have some entertaining action sequences. One sequence in particular, I think you've seen it in the trailers. It takes place on a mountain with a train going around it. That was easily the best action scene of the entire film. Also, there is a cameo towards the third act that I feel like a lot of people are going to enjoy. For me, it was one of the few holy shit moments of the entire movie. I'm not going to spoil it, obviously, but stay tuned for that because that was actually really cool. I always like to get the positive out of the way first, but just because there are some things that I kind of liked about the movie does not necessarily make this a good movie. For one thing, the characters in this film are extremely hit or miss. The characters in this film, there are going to be some of them that you care about. There's going to be a few characters that you feel invested in, that you're going to root for. And then the rest of the characters, there's really no depth or development given to them at all. So they feel like generic space adventure filler. Characters come and go in and out of this movie, and half the time you're not going to give a shit because the movie is not trying to make you give a shit about these other characters. We get into the pacing of the film. This film has a lot of inconsistent ass pacing. In fact, some of the pacing in this movie is downright ass cheeks. Sometimes everything is going good and it's going at a good pace and you feel like you're invested in the narrative and it's moving forward. And then there are other times in the movie where I had to sit there in the theater and I'm like, holy shit, nothing is happening. So many moments where I got bored at different parts of this movie, particularly in the second act, where I just feel like everything was at a standstill and there really wasn't a lot of forward progression, which would be fine if we got some really good character development along the way, but we didn't. So really it just feels like a bunch of random things are happening that lead into scenes that lead into each act progressing, and you don't actually feel like there's something compelling being told here. The biggest issue with Solo: A Star Wars Story is that it failed to come up with justifiable, legit reasons for why it exists. Star Wars fanboy for my entire life here, but I am always honest. Solo: A Star Wars Story feels like an assembly line cash grab movie where you can put Han Solo in it, you can put a bunch of generic space adventure shit in it, you put a bunch of characters that no one gives a shit about it, and then you do a whole bunch of Easter eggs and references, you call it Star Wars, and then you count on everybody to show up. Yeah, I'm sorry, this particular time I'm not going to fall into that well. There's no real depth, there's no real emotional backdrop to anything that happens in this movie. There's a lack of stakes in this movie because there's a lack of attention to detail to anything in this movie other than, hey, that was fun. Do you remember this? You remember this from the original trilogy? Yeah, it's pretty cool, right? Han Solo himself as a character, there's really nothing interesting that they do with him. There's no depth whatsoever given to him. There's kind of a relationship that he has with this one girl played by Emilia Clarke in the film that I thought they were going to go into, but didn't even give that relationship a lot of attention. Really nothing here that you haven't seen before. There's nothing refreshing. There's nothing new. There's nothing exciting. If the point of a young Han Solo movie is to show a young Han Solo acting like a young Han Solo, doing shit that a young Han Solo would do that you already know that he does, I kind of don't really get the point. While I was somewhat entertained by this film, I also felt a complete indifference towards it when I walked out. Solo is not a bad movie, but it is the definition of average. It's mediocre, and mediocre films on the Superfan Show belong in the Fortress of Solitude. Guys, I'm sorry, I wish I had better news for you. I think that a lot of people are going to go to this movie and they're going to be entertained by the action sequences and the Easter eggs. But once you strip all that away, this movie really has nothing more to offer you. Please like and subscribe to the Superfan Show. And as always, if you like what you see, tell me how you feel and stay tuned to hear more from the Man of Steel. Peace.